Hello everyone. This is now going by a fake name instead of my real name. This is Days Wit, and here is technically my third video, but it's going to be my second because I'm remaking the second video I made because it was a disaster. About 20% of the video was my finger blocking it, and I missed a bunch of stuff, and I was under the weather. So I'm going to try it again tonight. This is a new expansion I've been trying to flesh out. It's called Revolution, and in this game, all the powers playing except for China can attempt to start a successful coup d'état on any neutral country, except for a neutral country that is pro your side. So if you start a revolution and are successful in a strict neutral, it becomes pro your side. If you start a revolution in a pro your enemy, and are successful, that state will become a strict neutral. And many other things will happen in regard to the aftermath of revolutions. And it, I think will add a lot more to the game, and we'll see as I try to explain it better than I did the first time. Let's say turn one, Germany goes first, and they decide, the UK may try to do Middle Earth, so to try to disrupt that, I could try to start a revolution in Persia. And the way you can try to start a revolution, it's going to cost a lot of money, and you have to roll for it. So to start a revolution, it's going to cost you as many spaces as it takes to get there from your closest land unit, plus any IPC value, plus any soldiers shown on that territory. So, for example, Persia has 2 guys and it has 2 IPC. Let's see, the closest German territory would probably be Romania, and it has land units, so you can actually use that as your starting point. So from there you go 1, 2, 3, 4, plus 2 is 6, plus 2 is 8. So Germany would have to pay $8 to try to start a revolution in Persia. And we're just going to go ahead and say that Germany, and for rolling, to have a successful revolution, I was initially thinking rolling a 1, but I feel like if it was a 1, then probably not too many people, if any, would actually try to start a revolution. So it's actually going to be 2 or less. So it's going to be 1 and 3, which kind of evens the odds. And I think a lot of countries will probably take a go at it, try to start revolutions in different parts of the world. And I'll try to cover all that as best I can. So Germany is successful. And they, boom, there's a revolution in Persia. So Persia is no longer pro-allies. It's now a strict neutral. But revolution, that causes chaos. It destabilizes the area. And people flee in all different directions. And every single bordering country now has a refugee camp. And it doesn't just have, women, children, and the elderly. It also has men of fighting age that want to take back their country, and it's going to cause issues. And now that there's all these extra people in these states, they don't have enough food to feed everybody and enough housing for everyone. So it's going to destabilize the area. And every state that now has a refugee camp, the IPC value goes down 1. So Iraq, which is 2, is now 1. These two have no IPC value, so it's basically -1, which doesn't really come into play unless someone wants to start a revolution there. So it would be -1 from the cost to attempt to have a successful revolution. Now, this is key because FEC can't just move right into Persia and build a factory in the next turn. Now they either have to violate strict neutrality, or they could also start a revolution of their own. But if they do, it will go back to pro-allies. But now there'll be an extra refugee camp in every bordering state, which will subtract another IPC. And the refugee camps actually will end up causing a lot more trouble in the long run. For every 2 turns that any state borders a state that has a refugee camp, and that state, say Turkmenistan, does not have any ground troops in it, if the second turn comes, actually, I'm sorry, I actually messed this up. Okay, any state that has a refugee camp for more than 2 rounds with no troops in it becomes a failed state. Let's just say no one took care of this mess, so all 3 of those became a failed state. And what that means is that all 3 of these countries are now wiped off the board. Any IPC values cannot be collected from any other country for the rest of the game. It's a failed state, and really you probably don't want to go in there. And if any, Russia, especially in this area, is going to be really concerned if a failed state shows up on their borders. Because what ends up happening, similar to, hey, these refugee camps were destabilizing those states for 2 rounds. Now, any state that borders a state that has a failed state, for 1 turn, that's without any land troops in it, that state also becomes a failed state, and very quickly will cascade, like especially through Russia where there's no troops anywhere, so there's nothing to stop it. The Allies, and in some cases, we'll see later, the Axis will have to step up and actually use resources to try to stop this revolution that likes to travel. And so like I said, let's say Russia never got a troop in Turkmenistan, or anyone did, so that's going to fail after 1 turn. And now Kazakhstan, which is really, really big, has a chance to fail after the following turn. And there's probably war going over everywhere, so they're not really trying to send any troops there. They're trying to protect Stalingrad and so on. So Kazakhstan will fail, and now China's in danger. And the failed state could really be like a massive domino effect and take down states everywhere, and that could actually be a strategy. And I'll try to work that out, because there's a few other areas in the map where you can try to strategically start a revolution just to send refugees out and hopefully start a cascade of failed states. Obviously, Turkey is a target for the Axis and the Allies, as it's like the gateway to the Middle East, it's the gateway to the Balkans, it's the gateway to Russia, and really, pretty much Italy, Germany, the UK, Russia, that's probably it early on in the game, have a shot to try to turn Turkey from a strict neutral into a pro-Axis or pro-ally. And as I pointed out earlier, they could, the other side could come back and start another revolution to keep sending the pro or strict neutral one way or the other. But it's also going to cause lots of refugee camps, and it's going to detract from the value of actually holding any Turkey or any of the border countries, which start losing IPC as more refugee camps pop up. Sweden would probably be a good one too, for either England or Germany. If you were able to turn that from a strict neutral to a pro-ally or pro-axis, you can quickly, drop an infantry in there, and now you have 6 new infantry from your country occupying Sweden. And if UK is the one that turns Sweden and lands some troops, they get obviously 6 new infantry, but also Germany is going to lose 5 IPC for a national objective because Sweden is no longer neutral. So that's also probably might be worth the take on it. So let's say from how much it would cost. From Scotland would be 1, 2, 3, 4, plus 6 is 10, plus 3 is 13. So even though Sweden is so close, it's going to cost $13 to attempt that maneuver. And it may be worth it depending on how the game's going. or geez, that might be a nice little like sneak attack to shock Germany, and maybe you could throw them off their tracks for a little bit. But Germany could also go for Sweden, and there's value in both, but probably more value for the UK. Obviously, there's Ireland, which that doesn't benefit anyone to try to start a revolution. Same with Switzerland, and I don't think I've mentioned it yet, but like as I said, refugee camps are going to cost IPCs, and they're going to destabilize the region. And the only way to stop that typically is just to get an infantry or a tank or a mech or just a land unit in there, and that will stop the possible spread of that destabilization to bordering countries. But you have, excuse me, you have different options depending on which side you're playing. If you're the Axis and you have refugees in a state you now control, you're the bad guys. You can just kill them, and not even blink an eye. But you would have to wait one full turn and lose that one IPC, and then you can kill them. Or you can do what the Allies are meant to do with refugees. They either put infantry down to babysit them, or you can transport those refugees to any of your capitals, and that refugee is now contributing to the war effort, and that capital state will now be worth one more IPC for every refugee that gets transported there. Like for example, let's just say on turn 1 UK brought that guy in there because that's still pro-allies, and we'll just, it's not a failed state. We're just because we're back on turn 2, and so say we got a guy there, and Persia is no longer pro-allies, it's now a strict neutral. You can break neutrality, or if you want to, let me think, what am I doing here? Oh, sorry, we're going to do this guy. Eastern Persia has a refugee camp, so you can actually take care of this refugee camp by transporting it back to Calcutta. So there's a transport, and every refugee camp that's going to be moved to a capital has to be escorted by at least one land unit, so infantry, tank, mech, however you want to do it. So this guy's going to pick up the refugee. They're going to get on the transport. 1, 2. So now India, instead of 3, is worth 4. And that's going to work throughout the game, especially if, like the Middle East, there's not much around there, so if you start a revolution there, it could get out of control pretty quickly. And you can end up having refugees everywhere, or actually, I can't say refugees, it'll be more failed states than anything, but you'll still have a lot of refugees. And so the Axis, if they want to, can murder them, or they can do what the Allies do and transport them back to a capital and gain 1 IPC value for that capital region. Let's see. Mongolia can also take part in this game, and that's probably going to be either Russia or Japan. And really, probably the only thing you can do is, this guy's in the wrong place. I knocked over some guys. Let's say, for example, Japan. Just for shits and giggles, because they're close and it's not that expensive, because it's 1 plus 2 is 3. It costs them $3 to try to start a revolution there. And buoyant, ooh-ah. If Japan is successful, they can move a guy in there, and they now get an extra 2 Japanese. Russia could try the same over here, although they probably shouldn't, even though for them it probably is only going to cost, well, it's going to cost a lot because there's nothing here. But by the time they do it, there might be these guys here might have moved down, might be boring, so it only costs 3. And if that's the case, these guys are all the way down here. Russia's on the retreat to try to reinforce Moscow, so they could start a revolution here and pop one of these guys in here on the way back, and then they get extra 2 Russians to run for their lives back to Moscow. Ooh. This area of the board has 2 neutrals in southern Africa, And this could get really interesting, although probably not until like turn 3 at least. Turn 2 would probably not be as interesting. But let's say a few turns have gone. England has taken this destroyer, and it's already over in Asia. These two guys have at least moved up to there, and the UK has just really forgot about this area because there's nothing going on. So let's say it's now turn 3 or turn 3. Yeah, sure. Let's say it's, turn 3 is happening. UK either they could attack the Italians here, but that depends on what's going on in the game. Let's just say they're moving up here because they're trying to get to Egypt to help keep that. So Italy goes, and they decide to spend what little money they have to try to start a revolution. And they're going to try to start a revolution in Mozambique because that's the closest state. Although Angola will also would be a great state to try it on. So Italy would be 1, 2, 3, plus 1 is 4, plus 2 is 5. And I think that's the shortest way you can get there. So here you go, 1, 2, oh no, wait, sorry. 1, 2, 3, plus 1 is 4, plus 2 is 6. So Italy would have to pay $6 to try to start a revolution in Mozambique. Now let's just say, just because the video would be boring otherwise, Italy is successful. Mozambique is no longer strict neutral, it's now pro-Axis. And now, whoopsie, there's a refugee camp in Tanganyika, a refugee camp in Rhodesia, and a refugee camp in South Africa. So as you can see here, just by doing that, you've taken $3 off of the UK's budget. -1, -1. That 2 is now 1. And as you'll see, there's no troops here. The UK has, they start moving their troops northward, and they're all the way up here. So now the UK probably can't mess around. I mean, they could be heavily under attack in Egypt, and they have to decide, do they go to Egypt to try to keep it, or do they send some troops or all the troops back down south to deal with the destabilization that's happening here now? And as I said earlier, for every neighboring state, I'm sorry, never mind. For initially, if a state has a refugee camp and no land units there, after 2 turns, it becomes a failed state, etc. It's going to be all a failed state. And as I mentioned, any neighboring states that do not have land units in it, that border a failed state, after 1 turn, they all become failed states. And it's going to cascade, especially in Africa, because there's like no troops. So the UK especially has to pay attention to the neutral countries down here if you're playing this variation. But that could actually end up being a lot of fun. There's some neutral territories here in West Africa. And probably not worth doing, but maybe it's later in the game. France is still in it, and you just have some money to burn. And maybe you have a transport somewhere with a tank or a guy, so you're closer. And you're going to, let's say you take Portuguese Guinea. And so that's no longer strict neutral, it's pro-Axis, say. And there's going to be a refugee camp in French West Africa. And probably the French guy that was here, long gone at this point and dead. And so you're going to have a refugee camp here, and probably no one's coming to save it. I mean, maybe the U.S. could reach it, but they probably have their own issues going on in Europe and the Pacific. So this is probably going to go 2 turns, failed state, and then very quickly, and again, there's nobody here, it's going to go failed state, failed state, failed state. And eventually, UK is probably going to send somebody down because we need to stop this, and probably the failed states will stop here. And now all these states are wiped off the board. France no longer gets that one. France no longer gets that one, or anyone who conquered it. Europe loses 1 hair. Europe would lose 1 hair, etc. And even if you conquered that back, these are gone. They're failed states. You will not get any points for that. And I haven't mentioned this yet, but I was also thinking it probably won't come up too much, but if you want to travel through a failed state or fly over a failed state, it's probably going to be really dangerous because there's no government, there's militias, etc., etc. So if you're moving any army through or over a failed state, 1 die will be rolled, and if a 1 comes up, you will lose a plane or a infantry or tank or whatever, just because it's lawless land. Let's see, Spain and Portugal. Let's be honest. No one's going to want Portugal, but the U.S. especially, and probably even Germany, but really the U.S. is definitely going to want to try to start a revolution in Spain, because if they're successful, they'll be 1 sea zone closer to mainland Europe. And if they're successful, and at this point Germany's conquered all of France, you're going to, boom, refugees are going to pop up on the bordering states. And as I said earlier, Germany could just murder them, but for at least 1 turn, they're going to lose 1 IPC on their collect income turn for these 2 states. Or Germany could also, send them to the work camps, because they're very close, just 1, 2, 3 spots to Berlin. So they could send like a tank, or they could even like pass them off. Like a tank could come and go 1, 2, and then another guy could pick it up and go and finish that, so you can actually get that refugee to Berlin in 1 turn. But America probably really wants Spain, just like everyone wants Turkey. Jeez. The last area of the board I wanted to touch on is South America has so many states, but very little action, other than maybe America coming down and plop someone in Brazil just to get a free $2. But I was thinking, just to really liven up the game and add a new aspect to it, let's say Argentina is going to have a special rule. And it's only for Germany. Germany could try to start a revolution in Argentina, and because Argentina was strictly neutral because they were basically strong-armed by the Allies and America to the north, but the leaders actually really had a hard-on for Germany and Hitler, so they would so want to join, but they'd get their asses kicked by America, so that's why they're strict neutral. But if Germany were to come and try to start a revolution, they'd be a little more open to it than other countries. So for one, if Germany's going to try to start a revolution in Argentina, they get 1 less IPC cost to try to start a revolution. So that's one of the special rules for Argentina. So let's just say they've conquered Normandy, or even let's just say they're in Holland or something. It doesn't really matter. I'm just gonna just point randomly just to come up with a number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's going to be 8 spaces, plus 2 will be 10, plus 4 will be 14. Subtract 1 for that special relationship with Germany, and it will cost Germany $13 to try to start a revolution in Argentina. If Germany is successful, a small little army will pop up on Argentina. That'll be, I don't know, it'll be German, it'll be Argentinian guys under German control, or whoever you want to call it. And so right here I have, and it doesn't have to be what I selected here. I just didn't know what to do. I just want to have a small army that Argentina immediately becomes German control if they're successful, unlike the other neutrals, which become pro your side, etc. And immediately some German troops are going to be available here. And just for here, these are all pieces from the original set, including the Enemies on the Horizon set. So the Enemies on the Horizon, I have the original cruiser for Axis and Allies, which doesn't have to be a cruiser here because it can be whatever you want, because it looks nothing like the German cruiser. And the very first artillery in the original Axis and Allies game. And infantry, and a special forces, which, if I remember correctly, also can be a paratrooper, and moves to, maybe attacks at 3. I can't remember, and yeah, fighter. And from that, I also didn't know. I don't think they should get a factory, because that's just too much. But I was curious, should they get it an air base or a naval base or both, or none of them and just let Germany try to build them? But if Germany is successful, America will immediately be at war with Germany due to the Monroe Doctrine. And that's obviously if it's before turn 4. But if the U.S. is at peace with Germany, and Germany causes a successful revolution in Argentina, the U.S. and Germany will be at war, but the U.S. will still be at peace with Japan and Italy. And I was also kind of thinking, make this even more enticing. Maybe if they're successful in Argentina, they automatically claim Chile too, and they just get the 2 guys there. And as mentioned earlier, refugee camps are going to pop up. Chile. Duh. And the U.S. doesn't have any troops here to try to stop this chaos that's now going to be spreading north. And if the U.S. wants to stop that, they're going to have to expend a lot of resources and send them, to South America rather than to send them to Europe to help their allies there. But actually, at this time, if it's turn 1, they're not at war up there yet because they're still at peace. They're only at war with. Actually, I totally messed that up. They're at war with Germany. But really, they don't want to waste too much time down here. They want to send everybody to Europe as quickly as possible. But if they don't send people down here, Germany has troops here, so their government isn't going to topple. But these guys, after 2 turns, Brazil is a failed state. Let's see. Paraguay is a failed state, etc. And once the failed states come, the failed states travel quickly. 1 turn, they start going, and they're going to threaten Central America probably in, let's see, 2 turns. So America's going to have to pay attention because that's going to be going north pretty quickly until they actually hit some troops that will, stop that. But then, in the meantime, all these states, including the ones that have IPC values, they're going to disappear. They're going to be wiped off the map, and U.S. is going to lose, 1 point here, 1 point here. If the U.S. had initially taken Brazil or Venezuela or something, they'll lose those points, etc. But so yeah, that's my idea for revolution, and really the what seems to be the excitement of revolution, other than the special rule in Argentina, is the refugee camps and the chaos they cause. Like pretty much, let's see, how many continents? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4 continents. They will cause chaos. So that adds another element to the game. And if you like it, I actually like to have people give this a shot and give me their feedback on what works and what doesn't. Or even before you play it, you can add suggestions. But I'm excited to add this little wrinkles to the game. And I think I covered everything this time. So I hope you guys enjoyed. And if you want to, please leave me a comment or send me a message. Or if you know me on any of the sites outside YouTube, you can send me a message there or something. But all right, I'll hopefully have another video at some point. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.